Hello and welcome once again to the Many Rules of Film Club, which is available everywhere you can find podcasts, like, for example, Facebook, or iTunes, or Stitcher, or on our old-fashioned website, themanyrulesofilmclub.com. So I want to just welcome everyone, and my name is Jeff Yance. I'm the program director at the Loft Cinema, and I'd like to welcome, as always, my great co-host, the occasional filmmaker, Heather Lottis.
Hi, Jeff.
And the multimedia artist, Rusty Boulay-Stevenson.
And now, a frog and a bear travel across America.
Okay.
Don't.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that,
Moving
Rusty.
right along.
Moving right along. I like a Muppet. I like to start with a Muppet reference, always.
Yeah.
So that's really great.
I'll just do that every time now.
Do it.
Muppet reference.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about, I think, sort of a uniquely American genre, even though there are many examples of this across the world, is the road movie. So America makes a lot of them. We love them. There's many different variations of road movies. We're recording this in October, coming after the summer. Maybe some of us took road trips. They're not always quite as pleasant as you think they're going to be.
You start off all hyped up, and then things can go downhill.
And films kind of reflect that. Usually there's not a road movie about what a great, perfect, wonderful time it was. Usually something goes wrong, comedically or horrifically or existentially. But that's kind of what you get when you leave the comfort and safety of your home, which I think is what one of the defining elements I love about road movies is that you are leaving your quote unquote normal life. And this is for real road trips also, but movies about road trips, leaving your normal life, going out, finding adventure, being somewhat untethered. Anything can happen out on the road, really. Right. You sort of have to give up control to a certain extent. And movies, I think, have really sort of exploited that over the years, that fascination and also that fear of going out on the open road. So what do we think are some other defining elements of a road movie?
Well, one thing, I was talking about this to my friend Jimmy, and he pointed out that road trip films often show a time and place very specifically. For instance, to prepare for this, I watched It Happened One Night. And that movie, it was released in 1934, a pre-code film. It shows the 20s and 30s in a way that a modern audience doesn't. We're not used to the things that you see there. You see cars were so different, and what it meant to drive was so different at the time. And so you get to see these glimpses of America typically. The road trip film is a very American ideal, right? Because Americans love their cars and love the notion of freedom.
Interstates, we love them.
And so you get to see slices of America at a very specific time, like in It Happened One Night. For instance, the hotels were so different. They were really cabins a lot of times back then. You didn't have nobody had motels yet in the same way that we think of them now, or hotels, right? It was a very different thing to be traveling then and how you stayed. And so I thought that was really fascinating.
There were no like Taco Bell, Pizza Hut,
Right.
Subway conglomerations right off the freeway.
Right.
You had to go looking for diners and
Roadside diners,
motels. It's kind of like a glimpse of like a lost America.
Yeah,
a lot of road movies.
Absolutely. Well, and think Easy Rider, right? Easy Rider really captures that moment of counterculture in the 60s brilliantly. And then you see New Orleans in a way that New Orleans will never be that again.
Right.
No, yeah.
And what I find interesting about road movies is that very rarely is the plot centered around people traveling from metro city to metro city. It's always about rural America,
Right.
Small towns, kind of like a sense of what we have lost via industrialization and everyone moving to cities and sort of moving away from the middle of America. Usually it's road movies are set in the South and kind of like less developed areas.
Right. Well, it's, sort of a factor of also how to easily shoot, like the logistics of shooting a film. But It is true. I mean, we are a country that is so spread out. I mean, we have concentrations of populations, but you kind of figure, once you take a road trip, you learn quick that there's huge, vast, empty spaces in this country, and we just don't see them because we don't go out of the city often. Well, depending where you live.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like it's also a great opportunity for filmmakers to explore a kind of eclectic set of characters.
Yeah.
I've often thought of road movies as short stories inside of a larger narrative. Usually the way they're structured is, here's a vignette, these interesting characters we met in this town, we're off to the next town, here's some other characters. And they don't necessarily feed the plot, but they just feed the general overall idea that you're traveling through a different area than you're used to, and you're meeting different people. And
it lends itself to like a good ensemble cast. Like, you got 4 people in the car,
Right.
Or if you're in like in Little Miss Sunshine, you got the van full of the family. Like little hijinks happens with each character, or each character has their own side plot that follows the storyline. It helps that way. You can demonstrate a good family dynamic in lots of traditional road trip movies.
and an easy way to create drama. When you shove a bunch of people into one vehicle, there's going to be conflict.
Whether it's
Like
like
it or not.
kids arguing or...
Yeah, and you can play it off as a comedy or as a horror film, but it's going to create conflict. And one of my favorite road movies is Wild at Heart, the David Lynch film, and that to me is the perfect example of kind of weird stories that happen as you're traveling through the country, kind of random moments that end up accumulating in something really kind of awful at the end of Wild at Heart, but then kind of beautiful too when she becomes Glinda the Good Witch and all of that.
There's that.
There's that. But I think I think it's a great challenge for screenwriters to be able to make a coherent road film, because there are a lot of bad ones.
They're
but a lot of great ones.
They're messy, right? Because you do have all these different subplots that you can just drive into one. Oh, here's a subplot. Now we're going to leave that, and we will never speak of it again through the rest of the movie.
Right.
You get a lot of that, and you do get the cast of characters. One that's a sloppy one with a great cast of characters is called Roadside Prophets. And it's really this ensemble thing. John Cusack's in it. John Doe is in it. There's just a ton of different people that you see make cameos. It's a perfect sort of thing for cameos. One of the other things that you see in a lot in road trip movies is the montage, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like Sideways. Sideways is almost a montage movie.
Sure.
Like
Right.
when they go on their different road trips and off to drink the wine. So you get a lot of montages in road trip films as well.
Yeah, and it also poses great challenges for filmmakers filming inside of a car or filming on a highway.
Yeah, and I don't think...
And shooting on location in different towns. Like that's a real challenge because you're outside of a studio. You don't have a controlled environment. Anything could happen. So I think road movies are hard to make.
They are.
Challenging. And I know that you, occasional filmmaker Heather Lottis,
Oh, back in the day.
you worked on a film.
Yeah, I was the DP, director of photography, for those of you who don't know. One of my friends was doing her graduate thesis film, and a lot of it was a road trip kind of thing. And it was a very deep kind of as existential, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but a lot of quoting of philosophy in there. But the road trip was the thing, and it's really hard to shoot on the road. It's logistics of traffic, and then you pick deserted roads so that you don't have to deal with traffic, but then you're out in the middle of nowhere and you may not have everything you need. And honestly, I mean, maybe equipment is better nowadays, but because it has been a while for sure since I've done this, probably like 15 years. But like putting a car mount on either the side of a car door or on the hood of a car is not easy, and it takes time, and any change takes time. And between shots, so it's very hard, especially if nighttime scenes inside the car, lighting the car, it's difficult. So it just is a different struggle, I suppose, just a different kind of struggle versus if you're on a lot and you get the lucky chance of getting to have everything there in that place. And so anyways, yeah, it just presents a whole nother technical challenge that, that people who have never made movies don't realize.
Yeah, and I think a road movie shot in a studio is sort of contradictory.
Well, the old
But it-
school like movie in the background and like
Rear-
you shake the
rear
car.
projection, yeah.
Yeah, and you shake the car.
Those
like,
are fun.
I mean, and they still use that on TV today.
Yes.
Granted, it's better with green screen, but it's still, that's a cheaper and easier way to do it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite give it as much grit or
You lose the texture of
as
yes.
like
sure.
doing in real life.
And living here in the Southwest like we do, I think a lot of road movies love the open roads of the Southwest because a lot of these movies are set in this part of the country because we have really distinctly, specifically beautiful landscapes,
With wide open spaces.
wide open
Yep.
spaces, and a lot of
Two-lane
sunshine.
roads.
Yes. Yeah. So that would be like a whole subgenre is Southwest road movies. And what do we think about romance on the road? I don't want to get into specifics, but romance on the road is easier
Oh, it's
than I think.
it's so much easier.
That's all I'll say.
And like comedy and the romance together, there's some cute little rom-coms that I can think of that work really well to road trips because you create that situation where you're in a higher pressure situation than you would be in a normal atmosphere where you could run away and be like, oh, I don't want to see you for like a week. But no, you're stuck in this car with this person. And I guess in a way, like in theory in the movies anyways, it's a quick way to get to know someone.
Yes. And I don't know if you've ever taken a real life road trip and found romance on the road. But it's again, I'm not getting into details here.
Right.
No,
But it is a different kind of thing because you know
sure.
that it has a shelf life.
Right.
You're going to be moving on
Right.
like
very
a
soon.
two-lane blacktop.
like in two-lane blacktop.
Yeah.
The young girl just hops in their car and rides with them
Yes.
for a while.
Yes. Maybe that's a good segue into
Yeah.
Two-Lane Black.
Yeah.
Two-Lane Blacktop is one of my very favorite movies of all time. 1971, Monty Hellman, director. It's probably one of the most existential. That's the prime example of existentialism in road movies.
Yes.
There's a man called the driver and a man called the mechanic. They don't have names. They pick up a hitchhiker named the girl. She has no name. And they end up in a cross-country road race with Warren Oates, who goes by the name of GTO. He doesn't have a name, but that's the kind of car he's driving. So it's about humans who have sort of been subsumed by their vehicles, basically. And the driver is played by James Taylor, the musician, and the mechanic is played by Dennis Wilson, the drummer for the Beach Boys. Neither one of them ever made a film before or since.
But they were both great in it.
They're great in it. They're not traditional actors,
No.
but they're great in it. And Warren Oates, of course, is one of the best American character actors ever.
One of the things interesting that his character is also part of road trip films, GTO. He's an absolute bullshitter. And that's one of the things about a road trip, like before the 1980s, you'd pick up people and share stories on the road, pick up these hitchhikers, and you could make up your story as you went along, right? And so that's a sub element of the road trip film too, is these bullshitters who are in road trip films.
Oh yeah, and kind of the idea of reinventing yourself on the road is a real trope of road movies, I
yeah,
think.
absolutely.
And the GTO character is the perfect example. He has a wet bar in the trunk, and he tries to pick up women on the road, and it's hinted at that he had a very tragic past. You don't know exactly what happened, but he's trying to run away from something and reinvent himself, making up stories about himself. He ends up picking up Harry Dean Stanton, who turns out to be a gay hitchhiker, which doesn't end well. And
I should watch this movie.
oh yeah,
Oh, wow, it's so
great.
good.
It's a road race movie that isn't about road racing at all, really. It's just about people sort of aimlessly driving around the country. And one of the best endings of a film ever, because the film ends with the film we're watching running through the gate of the projector and burning and then just falling off screen, which apparently the studio hated. They said, that's not the way to end a movie. Isn't this a car race
The projectionist is going to think they burned him.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So the movie did not do well at the time. It came in the wake of Easy Rider. So there were a lot of movies about
Okay.
young, disaffected people on the road looking for answers and not finding them.
I far prefer it to Easy Rider.
I think it's a much better film.
It is.
Yes.
It's a much better film. Easy Rider has everybody knows it. It's the iconic one. But to me, Two Lane Blacktop is I'd watch that in a heartbeat over Easy Rider at this point in my life. Easy Rider is really clunky, and I get bored by it, honestly. It has its moments.
It has its moments, sure.
But a lot of times, as we talk about, like that nostalgia of those moments, that's what people remember about a film. I don't see it as a great film. It's important for the time.
Yeah, it's iconic.
Yeah, and it's iconic.
Chilean Blacktop is much more mysterious, and you don't really know motivation and goals, and it's kind of how you feel when you're on the road. You don't always know. You're disoriented.
Yeah.
You're tired. You're lost. That's great.
Well, and like you said, it's supposedly a race. They enter into a cross-country race, but the mechanic and the driver stop and help GTO all the time. They'll stop and wait for him. And he even says at one point, he's like, look, man, I got no interest in being 500 miles ahead of you. I want it to be, we're close.
Right.
And so it's not really a race.
No, they're all in this together, which I think is kind of an interesting idea. It's a competition film where everyone is working together, but not really working towards anything. Interesting that this is the movie that supposedly inspired the real-life Cannonball Run.
Yeah.
Which did become an actual cross-country race. But this film inspired it, but this film is not really about anyone winning or losing because the film burns at the end and we never get to see who wins the race.
And the beginning of it shows a race that used to happen in Los Angeles. They had a lot of street racing in Los Angeles, and it kind of depicts that kind of street racing that they had.
Yes.
Was it called Brotherhood Island?
Brotherhood Island. Yes.
Yeah, where they had all this street racing in LA back in the 60s and 70s, and it brought all the different gang members together. They would race rather than be angry at each other. And so there's a really great podcast out right now called Bigger Than Life about Big Willie, I forget his last name right offhand, but it's Larger Than Life is the name of the podcast. It's really worth checking out. He's the one that kind of started and brought all these different groups together to race in LA. And the very beginning of Two Lane Blacktop shows off that kind of a race that was happening in LA at the time.
And that's how the driver and the mechanic are making a living, quote unquote, is just going from town to town, entering into these kinds of races across the country because they don't want a real job.
Nowadays, you just make a YouTube channel and make
exactly. Yeah. And it also the film lands in Flagstaff at one point, which is where they find the girl, the hitchhiker, who sort of throws a monkey wrench into all of their idyllic road trips. Yeah. Yeah. But then she just sort of vanishes. She jumps into another car towards the end of the film and just drives off with someone else. And it's just about it's a very aimless film that's just riveting.
It is.
It's kind of hard to describe if you haven't seen it, but I think it's one of the best movies of the 70s.
Yes,
for
without a
sure.
doubt. I watched it to prepare for this, and I just absolutely fell in love with it. You go a long time without any dialogue at different periods in the film. It doesn't even start with dialogue. You go a ways before there's real dialogue in the movie.
Yeah. It's just hypnotic watching the highway roll in front of the camera and cars driving, and it's really amazing. We showed this at the Loft Cinema once with Monty Hellman, and he came.
Oh, how cool!
He drove a GTO from Los Angeles, of course,
because
that's how I know. I was like, you are bringing this home to me in a big way, and it was great, and because he loves the road. He said, I like to drive. I don't like to fly if I can help it. So I think he was sort of living that story in the 70s. Like, I want to be on the road.
Yeah.
I think he's still doing it today. So, So it's on Criterion. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it.
Criterion. I should watch it.
Get it? Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes. So maybe I'll just talk about, so my pick, so that was one of them, but the same year that Two Lane Blacktop came out in 1971, there was another film, which is one of my very favorite road movie films, which is Duel, the first film by Steven Spielberg. And this is the very different take on the road movie. It's not an existential, finding yourself kind of movie. It's about the horror of being alone on a highway with a mad truck driver looking to kill you. And this movie is just like elemental, pure cinema because there's very little dialogue. It's one man, Dennis Weaver, plays a man named man, David Mann. So it's kind of metaphorical. He is a businessman who is going on a business trip. It's not exactly specified what he's doing or where he's going, but he's somewhere in the Southwest, driving his little red, I think it's a Dodge Dart, I think, through the Southwest. You don't know much about his life. You see him make a quick phone call to his wife. He stops at a payphone. She's back in the city, wherever that is. He says, I'm going to be home for dinner. I'm going to be done with this meeting. And you get a sense, oh, you are not going to make it home. I can already tell. And then when he gets back out on the road, he starts being followed by this really horrible 40-ton 18-wheeler truck that starts playing games with him, bumping his bumper. One of the scariest things in this film, and I've had this happen, is the trucker. So Dennis Weaver, star of McCloud at the time, a very popular actor, is trying to pass the truck, but the truck won't let him pass. And finally, you see the hand come out of the truck window waving Dennis Weaver on to pass. So Dennis Weaver passes, and there's a car coming in the opposite direction right away. So you know, oh, the trucker tried to murder him right there.
Right.
That's happened to me, not quite as frightening as that, but the idea of a trucker tricking you into having a head-on collision with another car.
Well, you're trusting the stranger to tell you,
Yes.
yeah, you can make it. You pass me.
I will put my life in your hands, mysterious truck driver.
Yeah.
And why it's terrifying is that you never see the truck driver.
Nope.
It's very specifically designed so you see maybe a cowboy boot or a hand waving you past. You never see a face. You never see a body. You just see this massive truck. And this truck, it's a real precursor to Jaws. It's like Jaws on 18 wheels because the truck is the monster.
Oh, for sure.
It's greasy. It's dirty. And there's a great moment in the film where you see the grill of the truck has all of these license plates from different states kind of hammered into the front grill.
Like those are
So
all
it's
his victims.
It's like those are all the people that you murdered and you took their license plates and put them onto your truck. But you don't know what the motivation is. You don't know who this trucker is. And so basically it becomes like a Hitchcock cat and mouse game, like trying to make, so he's not on an interstate, he's on an off highway out in the middle of nowhere. There's very few other cars. And it's basically the man trying to outrace the machine and who's going to win. And it's really just great. And Spielberg was maybe 22 or 23 years old when he made this. It was his first movie. It was a TV movie made for ABC television because that's where Steven Spielberg got to start, was making episodes of like Marcus Welby, Night Gallery, Columbo. And then Universal offered him this gig, like direct this film. It was written by Richard Matheson, who was a short story writer and a screenwriter, did a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, like the great William Shatner episode where he sees the gremlin on the wing of the plane. He wrote Incredible Shrinking Man, a lot of great sci-fi films. So it's a very tense script. There's very little dialogue. Mostly the dialogue you hear is Dennis Weaver's internal monologue, like, who is this person? What is he doing? How can I get away? And there are a couple of road stops at a roadside cafe. There's a roadside attraction reptile farm that he stops at. But of course, the truck finds him and ends up smashing these cages featuring all these snakes who end up getting into Dennis Weaver's car. And it's like horror upon horror keeps mounting and mounting. And it's just purely elemental. It's told through like long camera lenses, so everything seems like it's happening very fast. There's like lots of montage shots of the speedometer and the gas pedal and the grill of the truck. And there's not a traditional score. It's just like sounds of screeching tires and blaring horns. And it's a very almost avant-garde film, even though it was a television movie. I don't think you would ever really see a movie like this today, certainly not from Steven Spielberg or really anyone else.
Or on a network. You might find this on like a obscure, not popular Netflix movie or whatever, but you're not going to find this on a network.
Yeah, and it's they ended up releasing it theatrically in Europe because it got such good reviews and it was a huge movie. So they added a little footage to it so that it could be 90 minutes long and released it to theaters in Europe. And of course, the French loved it because the French love a lot of things that we don't. Although TV audiences loved it.
It's Scared the crap out of me as a kid.
Oh my gosh, yes. And every
That's what-
time we were on a road trip, I would think about that trucker waving the car by, and
That's the worst.
you couldn't help but think about that after you saw it.
Yeah, and
Right.
I think what's so effective is that you don't know the motive, and I think that's
He's just out for the joy of killing people on the road.
it's fun. It's fun to kill people on the road. But to me, it really taps into that kind of feeling you have if you're on the road alone, very vulnerable. This was also the era before cell phones,
Right.
which makes the movie even scarier because he can't call for help until he gets to maybe a truck stop cafe where they were going to have a payphone. And then he gets to the truck stop cafe, and then he sees, when he's inside, that the truck is parked outside. And the driver is not in the truck, so that means the trucker is in the cafe with him. But he can't determine who it is because there's a bunch of truckers in the cafe.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. And then there's a really great, I won't spoil it, but there's a great action-packed climax, which prefigures the ending of Jaws. And Spielberg has said that he actually crafted the ending of Jaws based on the ending of Duel. And there's
Interesting.
yes, and you can see that he learned a lot of tricks making Duel that he plunked into Jaws, like not showing the shark until the very end. A lot of the suspense techniques were very similar. And Duel, I think, has been vastly influential. I don't think there were a lot of like horror road movies before this.
No, I don't think so.
But I think one of to me, the best legacy films of Duel is the film called Joyride. You've seen Joyride, yes.
I have not.
Oh my gosh, with Steve Zahn and Paul Walker and Lily Sobieski.
Yeah.
And from 2001, I believe. And it's basically two college students on the highway. They start playing games with the trucker by trying to trick him into thinking that they're women on their CB radio who are interested in meeting him for a tryst at a hotel because they think, oh, we're much smarter than this dumb trucker because
right.
we're two college students. But it turns out they're not. And this mysterious trucker, whom you never actually see, but goes by the name of Rusty Nail, starts basically terrorizing them and pursuing them across the country. And oh, it's great. And it's really
great.
scary.
It's freaked me out.
Yeah.
I was like, why are they messing with the trucker? What don't they know?
Didn't they see Duel?
Yeah. Well, and besides that, he can run you over. Like that's my thing. Is his machine's bigger than your machine, so stop it.
Yes.
But that's like the pompous, young kid who thinks he's cocky and
That's right.
got a zoom car and can,
That's right. Well, and Duel, I think, really taps in. Like, we love cars, as we discussed, cars in America. We're a car culture. But Duel, I think, really sort of plays up how that kind of obsession can turn to horror very quickly. Because if you're alone on a road in your car, it's not going to protect you if an 18-wheeler wants to murder you.
No.
Because so even though Dennis Weaver's character's name is Man in it, and so it's man versus machine. I don't want to say who wins in the end, but it's a pretty satisfying ending. And
Yeah.
I think seeing that, it's clear that Spielberg was going to go on to a huge career because this movie is so perfectly crafted.
It really is.
And I've seen it with a live score because there's so little dialogue. I've seen bands do a live score to the film.
Oh, cool.
Because it's not a silent film, but it's mostly just scenes of driving and sounds of cars and horns. Very cool. And then just briefly, Spielberg, his first feature film after this was The Sugarland Express from 1974, which is about Goldie Hawn on a kind of on the lam road trip based on a real incident where a woman broke her boyfriend out of jail, and the two of them went across Texas to kidnap her child who had been taken away from her by the state because she was an unfit mother. And they kidnap a sheriff, keep him in the car with them, and they had like 120 police cars chasing them across Texas. And they became sort of media sensations. The media was covering them as they were driving. They became sort of folk heroes like Bonnie and Clyde. And it's a great film, and it's one of Goldie Hawn's early roles. But Spielberg obviously had a thing for cars in the road movie early on that he sort of moved away from. But if you want to be scared I would rent Duel. It's available to rent everywhere. But there are many other subgenres of the road movie. Of course, one of them being Lovers on the Lam. The road is a good place to go on the lam if you are running away from something or to something.
Sure. I watched a bunch of those films in preparation for this. I started down the path because I had considered two-lane Blacktop as a topic for conversation. But then I started going down the Lovers on the Lam rabbit hole, and I really enjoyed it. I watched They Live by Night, the Nicholas Ray film. It was actually his feature debut. He would go on to direct Rebel Without a Cause and Johnny Guitar and a lot of really great films. A real auteur, Nicholas Ray. And that one, it's really interesting because the Lovers on the Lam in this one, they're not really bad people, and it really features the love story more than the guy's just kind of in a bad situation and just keeps getting into bad situations, not because he's a bad person, but because he's just had some bad luck and then he's kind of stuck. Really worth checking out. I also watched Gun Crazy.
Oh, love that movie.
Gun Crazy is an all-time great film. Was made in 1950. Feels so far ahead of its time when you watch it. Doesn't it? I mean,
yes.
I really loved it. And Gun Crazy, they're just bad.
And it's great that she is sort of in control.
Yeah, the woman's in control, exactly.
Yes, but she's terrible.
Yeah, bad people.
Oh, her face
real bad
looks
person.
terrible on the poster.
Yeah, the poster's super cool.
Yes.
I want this poster.
She's gun crazy.
She is gun crazy. And it's really great. The first half of it, I was like, well, it's a good film. But boy, by the time you get to the second half of that movie, it's so darn good. And then Gun Crazy led me to watch, I'd seen Bonnie and Clyde before, and I really loved that movie. I had thought about talking about that one, in fact. But then finally I was led to Badlands, the Terrance Malick film. And Badlands is from 1973. It's Terrance Malick. It's his debut feature film, kind of coming out of nowhere. Again, a philosophy major in college. He'd written papers about Heidegger, was what he was most noted for before he made this film. And it stars Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. Warren Oates is in it as well as Sissy Spacek's dad. And this one really influenced so many films down the road, as did Gun Crazy. Gun Crazy had one shot in particular where they're at the wheel and they're kind of manic. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that totally is a shot from later on Natural Born Killers with Mickey Mallory Knox. In which Mickey's just crazed and the light, he's super backlit and his hair's going crazy as they're driving.
Yeah.
That shot started in Gun Crazy. But Badlands really influenced a ton. Moonrise Kingdom. You could point to Moonrise Kingdom, the two kids running off on their own. That's what happens here is Martin Sheen's a garbage thrower. He throws garbage for the day and he gets fired. He meets Sissy Spacek because she's outside on her front lawn. She's moved, a recent transplant from Texas to South Dakota. And Sissy Spacek is twirling her baton, and he asks, about talking to her, and he's like, I'd try anything once. And just everything about him is so, he's got a James Dean look, though, and she really likes that. And the movie is really dreamlike. At times, it almost feels like an impressionistic painting. Especially towards the end, they end up driving this Cadillac just through the Montana Badlands, no road or anything, because they're on the lam and being chased, and that doesn't feel real. You can't just drive your car through the Badlands like that. That's not real.
Right.
So the movie feels like a dream a lot, and you've got Sissy Spacek narrates it in kind of classic Terrance Malick form. She's an unreliable narrator, and she narrates like she's writing a romance novel or something. It's all silly and kind of drivel, a lot of the stuff she says. And she wants to date the much older, 10 years older. She's 15, and the Martin Sheen character is 25, and she wants to date him, but her dad doesn't like it. And so he goes into the house, and he's like, I got this gun here, sir. He's like, how about if I shoot you? What about that? And then they shoot the dad. And it just, none of it feels real, but it feels all too real at the same time. They have no attachment to anything. You know, she talks about her dad. Her dad shoots her dog, and she's like, well, so my dad shot my dog because he caught me running around behind his back, and now in addition to piano lessons, I got to take clarinet lessons. My dad says, if piano can't keep me off the street, maybe the clarinet will. And it's
That's so
darkly
weird.
humorous
Right.
like that, right? Like she's got some lines that are just bonkers. And that's just how detached she was. I mean, shot her dog. Everybody loves their dog, and yet she just glances over it.
Is she a
glosses over it.
sociopath or is she just a teenager? See, that's the
Right.
question that I
Yeah.
have watching that film. It's hard to tell.
It is very hard to tell.
Yeah.
She doesn't really do any of the killing. The Martin Sheen character does all of it, and he's nuts. And at one point, she says, he's the most trigger-happy person I've ever met. And it's like, yeah, for sure, that's the case. There's a scene where the killing just, it has no effect on anybody aside from the people being killed, but you just don't get the sense that it has any effect on the two main characters at all, right?
Well, half the people, well, maybe more than half, but the people that he murders don't need to be killed. It's not like a, you know, I must kill them or they will either kill me or whatever. It's not that situation at all.
Yeah.
It's like they're in the way.
And there's great, kind of like Moonrise Kingdom, there's this whole great stretch of the film where they end up building a makeshift house by a river.
Yeah.
And they end up
Which is-
and he ends up booby trapping the whole area in case anyone tries to intrude on their ideal paradise. And they both romanticize this whole experience they're having to the point where it seems like a story, and they're totally detached from the reality of the murders
How
that
they
they're
got
responsible
there,
for. Yeah, and it's that really interesting line, like, are they actually sociopaths, or is it? And I feel like Malick's making a comment on America, like America
For
is
sure.
so detached from violence that we don't know what the repercussions are, and we tell stories about everything, and we sugarcoat everything.
There's so much romanticism behind guns, right? I always think about how people are like, well, I carry a gun, so if some bad guy's out there and starts, it's like, in that kind of a situation, even police who are trained and who go through these situations make mistakes and don't end up shooting the bad guy, right? Like, but there's all this romanticism behind having a gun and what you would do. And there's one scene in particular where he makes this couple go down into a storm cellar or something, and he closes it, and then he just kind of pops them down in there. And in real life, there's no way those two shots killed both people, but in the movie, you don't see it, but you're told that he killed both people. He becomes famous, which is what happens with a lot of these lovers on the lam, is they become famous for what they're doing. Really interesting the way it works in They Live by Night, because the young guy, he becomes famous even though he hasn't even really done anything, and he becomes much more famous. These people are actually killing folks, and it's based on a real life serial killer and his girlfriend, Charles
Starkweather.
yeah, and Carrie Ann Fugit.
Yeah.
They, in Montana, killed 10 or 11 people, including a 2-year-old baby. Like a really terrible, terrible twosome of people. But the press covered them as if they were almost stars or something.
Have to sensationalize everything.
Yeah.
And that's what happens with Kit in this movie. When he finally gets caught, the police officer treats him with just such respect. And it's really frustrating. And when he signs his name the one time in front of the police officers, it's almost like he's signing an autograph.
And he gives him his combs, like, you're going to want this. This is going to be a collector's item. Yeah.
He's throwing things out to him.
Forgot about that.
He's got his hands cuffed, and he's on like the wing of a small plane talking to this group of police officers. And they really are treating him like he's a superstar. And you can see, I think Badlands is a far, far, far superior film to the Oliver Stone film Natural Born Killers. But you can see very much Oliver Stone took that one scene with him in the talking to the police and turns that into 40 minutes of a movie, and shows how we kind of again, the gun culture, we romanticize it, and culture on the road, we romanticize that. And so Malick kind of conflates them. The sense of freedom of the road and freedom of having a gun, those are two very American things, is having your own car and having your own gun, right? That's very American. And there is this notion of the notion that we were bound to go
manifest
destiny. Yeah,
Move west.
right, whether we were killing people or not, or there was still this romanticization of
Sure.
something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that we romanticized the notion of us taking over this land of the United States, doing that. And so this country was founded on that, of this westward expansion and using our guns to do it,
And that's the whole Western genre is kind of built around that idea of kind
No
of
wonder why I hate Westerns.
romanticizing gunfights. Yeah.
Well, and Badlands would not be as good without Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek. It was not. I mean, he has such great, like, it's not earned swagger, really, because he's a homicidal
Garbage collector.
person.
Yeah.
But he has such swagger, like you were talking at the end, and how he felt like, yeah, I did this. I did all that, so you would come and arrest me.
Yeah.
And he does it so well. And even though, like, he's not good for her, like, you get why she's like taken in by him and why she wants to go with him. Even I knew as a kid that he would be a bad guy, but you get it. You get why she's won over and why she goes with him. I don't get why she stays with him now, but you get why he's so charming.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, she does leave him.
Right.
She ends up marrying her defense attorney's son, which is interesting in and of itself.
Right, as the coda to the film. He's executed.
Yeah, he's executed.
And I just always wondered about the real life Carol Ann Fugate. Like, how did she reconcile later in life
Or maybe she
what
didn't.
she had done? I don't
Maybe
know.
she
Yeah.
didn't take any responsibility for what she.
Yeah, she may not have
participated in.
pulled the trigger, but she was certainly an accomplice.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
she could have gotten away at any moment.
And that's how Sissy Spacek is throughout this. She doesn't ever pull the trigger, and she kind of looks down on, like she says, he's the most trigger-happy person I know. But she's very much a part of it and very much encourages him.
Right. Well, that she gets off on it a
it's-
little bit.
yeah, yeah,
maybe
without a
more than
doubt.
A little bit.
Yeah, because it
Without a
brings
doubt.
adventure into her drab life.
Yeah.
Right.
And as mentioning off mic, there's a great photograph of the real Carol Ann Fugate when they were arrested, and she's being put into the back of the police car, and she has handcuffs on, and she's drinking a Pepsi out of a bottle with a straw, and she's smiling and waving at the cameras.
Like, how crazy.
Yeah, like that to me seems like sociopathic behavior, but she was also like a 14-year-old girl,
Right.
and I just don't know whether she even understood
yeah.
the ramifications of what had happened to her. She thought, "Oh, I'm famous. They're taking my picture. It's great."
Right. I mean, I don't think that you can hold a 14, even though I'm sure some prosecutors would disagree with
Yeah.
me this day and age.
Yeah.
But I don't think you should hold a 14-year-old accountable for their actions like
Right.
that. But I do think if she didn't change her ways as she got older, then, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah. But I think casting, you're right, Heather, is key because Sissy
Yeah.
Spacek, she brings a level of kind of sympathy to that character,
Innocence.
and innocence and kind of otherworldliness.
Yeah.
Like maybe she doesn't understand like how humans operate somehow.
Right. Or like, was she really, honestly, when I first saw it, I think it was like, it felt like she was sheltered in a way with her father. Like, even though he had all these rules that she didn't like, but I got the sense of like, maybe she was more sheltered than normal.
And
As to maybe that was
And there's
why.
the missing mother. There's no
Right.
mother figure for her. So
That's right.
there's a lot of backstory that's not explicit.
Right.
That she probably had a not great childhood, I
Yeah.
would think, and the dad shooting her dog and
Gives you a sense that things aren't so great.
things aren't great. So
No.
you can see why she'd want to leave.
Right. Have an excuse to get out.
But
And
May-
you know nothing about Martin Sheen's character, Kit, before he's a garbage man.
He's just bad news.
Yeah. Yeah, just bad
Bad.
news. He somehow lived 25 years without being in jail, or at least
Right.
not at that point, not in jail, but you get the sense that he would have ended up there anyway.
right.
How lots of serial killer stories start out.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think smart that Malick told it from the girl's point of view because if it had been from the Martin Sheen character's point of view, it would have been a very different film because you don't know what his motivations are or what his history is.
Yeah.
No.
So you're sympathetic for her.
And you wouldn't feel that otherworldliness, really, because
Right.
her narration really adds to that kind of.
It really
feeling.
does.
Yeah.
It really does. Her narration really makes it dreamy.
Dreamy. And it is weirdly a beautiful romance, even though it's horrible.
is.
There's a shot in Badlands that I think is one of the most beautiful shots in the movie where the two of them park their car in the middle of the night on the Badlands and leave the headlights on.
Yeah.
And they get out and dance in the headlights.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's grossly romantic.
It's disgusting, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, what a cute, nice couple. And they're like,
So,
whoops, I
yeah.
forgot.
In between the murdering, they were able to be romantic.
Yeah, yeah. So Malick is sort of even like mimicking her sort of romanticizing of the murdering by like visually romanticizing them,
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is interesting.
When that's what happens when they're in the treehouse or whatever, too. Right? Is that romanticization?
Yeah.
My brain not working today.
That's why he's a great filmmaker.
We know what you mean.
Thanks, Heather.
Well, yeah. So Lovers on the Lamb. Yeah. So
It's a great one.
usually it's couples who have done horrible things.
But
I think.
excellent movie. I mean, I can't recommend that movie even. I mean, I'm not saying you want to watch it 10 times, but it's a great one of the best movies.
And stunning that was his first film.
Holy cow.
So
Yes.
Spielberg and Duel, first film, amazing. Badlands, first film, incredible.
And Nick
Crazy.
Ray, his first film being They Live by
By
Night,
Night.
also just incredible.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of the best celluloid ever shot in the daytime is Badlands. Like,
It really is.
It's
It's
beautiful.
so gorgeous, and like I said, a work of impressionism. That's really I'm with you, Heather. It's really one of the great films.
Yeah, and I would just mention the score of Badlands, which is that windpipe, the flute, which they used again in True Romance. If you remember, they used the same
Oh,
score.
that's right. Wow.
So True Romance, of course, is another Lovers on the Lamb story, and there's a lot of explicit references to Badlands in that, like right down to using the same music. It's a very influential movie, for sure. So, and there's also like weird, undefinable road movie.
road movies, and that's what Heather picked. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's what I do.
Yeah.
I picked the movie Locke, which stars the one and only visual person you see in this whole movie for 90 minutes is Tom Hardy, who, if I could pick any actor I'd want to watch on screen only for 90 minutes, Tom Hardy was in the top 5. I love him. So I'll be honest and say he's one of my favorite actors ever. So, and I think he's one of the most honest actors that we have these days. He's honest, like when he's interviewed, and he's honest on the screen, in my opinion. So, anyways, I love him. But I picked Locke because it's weird. It's not an ensemble. He's the only person that appears on screen, and it's a 90-minute drive, essentially, of him going from, I can't remember what town, but he's basically driving into London. And so his name is Ivan Locke. He plays a manager of a work site who they fill construction sites pre-building foundations with cement. So his cement is his game. And as you find out during the movie, he takes huge pride in his work. So the first thing you see is a work site, and you do see you don't see their faces, but you do see other guys leaving the work site. But the only person's face you see is him. And you see him get into his car. And you see the next scene is like a stoplight. And he's at first going left. And then all of a sudden he pauses and the car behind him honks. And he just quickly turns his signal to the right and he goes right. And you don't realize till later on in the movie that that's when he's made his decision that will change his life forever. And I don't want to ruin everything because I didn't go into this movie knowing the whole plot. I only went into it knowing that it was just him. But to kind of give you enough to get you interested, because you're like, I want to watch a movie of Tom Hardy riding for 90 minutes. Yes, you do.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And so, and to back up a smidge, it's directed by Stephen Knight, who has not directed a lot, but he's written a ton. He reads for Peaky Blinders, which is a series, a long series. People love that series. I haven't started watching it yet, but there's some big fans of that. Dirty Pretty Things, Eastern Promises. He's a great writer. he did direct another movie recently called Serenity, which is a horrible title, but it had McConaughey and what's her name?
Anne Hathaway.
Anne Hathaway.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes.
It didn't really do well at all. I haven't seen it. It is on cable right now, so I will give it a try because he did Locke. So he directed Locke, and his idea was coming up with this, this crazy idea, honestly. And Tom Hardy loved the idea, and he also thought of it. It was very much made him feel like he was doing a play. And the way they shot the movie was to do the whole sequence every night for about, I would say, give or take a week. So they shot continuously every night, all the set up so that the editor would have plenty of things to work with. And between Tom Hardy's face and his reactions and his role, the other role is the road. Not really his car. I mean, a car kind of plays a role, but it's not really big. You just see him connecting to the Bluetooth and trying to call people. But he has to make so many calls during his road trip because, so he's going on this road trip, and I don't want to give it totally away, but basically someone needs his help and support in London, and he has made a decision to leave a big job that's going to happen the next day, one of the biggest cement productions besides, he says this repeatedly in the movie, one of the biggest cement pours besides military complex in the world. And so it's like it's like millions of pounds of cement they're laying. So this is not just like, hey, I'm laying my porch. It's like, if he lays this wrong, a building could sink. A building that's 55 floors. And so you get the severity of him leaving. So he's leaving, and while he's leaving, he starts to call his foreman to say, you're going to have to do this for me. And of course, his foreman's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what do you... So the other thing is, so you only see Tom Hardy visually, but the other actors play key parts. So he's on the phone continuously through this ride. And his foreman is played by Andrew Scott, who one is in the last season of Fleabag, which you should see. And also he plays Sherlock's nemesis in the Benedict Cumberbatch version of Sherlock. He's excellent, and he plays that foreman on the phone. I should have recognized his voice, but I didn't. And then Ruth Wilson plays his wife on the phone. And then Olivia Colman plays the person that he's going to find in London to help. And then Tom Holland, Spider-Man, plays his son. He also talks to on the phone. So he's got great actors supporting him. And they actually had them off-site all hooked up so they could give him a call while he's in the car. So they recorded him like multiple ways, but they also did it so he could hear them in the car. And I thought that was so cool to give him more of a feeling of what it was like. But you really see, like, you see a man who's just like, I would say, average, maybe a little bit above average, middle class. Got a job, a family, successful, is leaving his town to go to London. And when he gets to London, he doesn't really have any of those things. His life is forever changed. And it's a huge arc in 90 minutes. You see him go through multiple emotions of like, but also like, honestly, I think some of the best acting he does is when he's calmly talking to people, like calmly, like instructing his foreman, like, this is what you need to do. Occasionally he gets animated because the foreman gets drunk, and he's like, because he's so nervous that he's going to have to do this job without him. And he's like, oh, I'm not drunk. He's like, I know you're drunk, and I want you to run. I want you to run and go do this. And you can tell that he's probably a workaholic. He probably makes his work more important than his family, his wife, and everything, basically. And at this moment, he's deciding that's not the most important thing. Yet he's calmly explaining to his foreman what he needs to do to make it right. He still wants to make it right, even though he's saying, I'm going to make this decision and probably get fired. But he does it in a way that's just, you just watch, and it's just great. I don't know. It's hard to explain, like the movie you were talking about before, Two-Lane Blacktop.
Yeah.
Because it is kind of him realizing he comes from, obviously meager means. He was a child out of wedlock. He always felt that kind of heavily on his mind. He obviously, and there's scenes where he's speaking to his dad, but his dad's not really there, and he's has an issue with his dad, and he never made peace with that. So he's kind of in anger yelling at his dad, saying, look at me. Like, I am doing so much better than you. I'm a better father. I'm a better human. I can keep a job. I'm successful. There's a line where he says he took the Locke name back and he made it something rather than the horrible things that his father did with it. And basically just saying, I am not going to be you. I refuse to be you. And he goes, like, he does that, if he does to his dad a couple times, but all this in between, the phone ringing with, the woman waiting for him to come to talk to him and support her, and then his wife calling, and then his son calling to make sure everything's fine, and then his boss calling saying, you're fired, but then him saying, no, I've taken care of it. Everything's taken care of. And calmly, just all together.
Yeah.
It's a feat among feats.
I think so. When I saw that film in the theaters when it came out, I thought, this is not going to work. Like, I want to see Tom Hardy because he's great, and it's a cool idea, but it really works. And I think it's a real testament to Tom Hardy.
For sure. Because
that's a tough thing. It's like watching a one-man show for 90 minutes.
You are.
And you're in one location in a car, but they still managed to make that visually interesting through the lighting and the camera placement. And then, of course, Tom Hardy later as Mad Max, you know that he is the king of the road.
Right.
Really, now.
Yes.
I think it's a great film.
Yeah, I think the other thing that makes it better is the cinematographer used a bunch of cool angles and reflections and lighting to get interesting. So it's at night. So he's driving, I think when he starts is about 9 o'clock at night, and there somewhere in the UK. And it's nice. You're not going to get pretty roadside scenes. You're not. It's night. So a lot of lighting, and he said he had fun with it, trying to figure out what would create images, and he does a lot of blurring of headlights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I didn't get bored at all.
It's very artistic.
It's very artsy and visually, but because you hear Tom Hardy and him, honestly, it's like phone calls and phone calls and phone calls. He barely gets time to there's a part where he thinks he's getting sick, so he reaches over and tries to, he's drinking a little bit of cough syrup, but then the phone rings again. Yeah. And so it's this constant barrage of people calling him. So that's an everyday situation for lots of people, in their car and taking phone calls. But is your situation where your life changes within 90 minutes? It's an interesting presentation. I did look up it was made for $2 million, which is pretty damn cheap, and made $5 million. So I was like, oh, hey, it did make more than it was made for.
Yeah,
so
a success.
Regardless, it's a small budget movie. And I'm sure Tom Hardy took a discount on his salary. But it doesn't fit exactly in all of our kind of road trippy movies, but it does in that, how much time do you spend with people in the car with you? A lot of times you're alone.
It's very isolating.
Yeah, and cars, and we live this isolating life that we don't really realize it, and you don't know I always say, even though if I get cranky at other people driving really slow or being annoying, I always remind myself, you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what happened in their day. Yeah. And I think this film proves, it's an example of that. You don't know what granted, he made it from point A to point B. I'll give you that ending. He did make it to where he needed to go. But how many times are you driving where you don't even think about the other people driving around you?
Right. And technology makes him a little less isolated. It's just interesting as you're thinking about Duel from 71, where it's one man in a car.
Right. With no
phone technology. So he has an inner monologue, which is how they did it in the 70s. You hear his inner thoughts, but he doesn't get to talk to anyone. So Tom Hardy gets to actually develop his character through talking to other people because of technology.
Yeah. And that's interesting because you get to see, or you get to feel how he is as a dad and a little bit as a husband, hearing the conversations with his sons and then his wife, and how they set it up. They're like, hey, Dad, we're wearing the shirts because they're going to be a football or soccer game on TV. We're wearing the shirts. Mom actually wore her shirt today. She got you sausages and beer. Where are you at? And, he has to say, I can't make it tonight. I'm not coming home.
Right.
And disappoint them. And they're like, they can't kind of believe it, but they don't really realize what's going on. And the wife is like, what the hell? I'm wearing your shirt. I'm wearing the shirt that I'm supposed to wear. And so you get that that little slice of his life that you wouldn't get, obviously,
Right.
if you didn't have that. And so they dropped those things in there purposefully. I don't think if they had, it would have been as compelling, of course. I mean, because I wouldn't want to watch just 90 minutes. I mean, I love him, but I would not watch 90 minutes of Tom Hardy talking to himself in a car. I don't think I would anyway. So,
Unless he was being chased by a murderous trucker.
and like he was taking off his clothes or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
but even then, nah, probably not. And 90 minutes is a long time.
Yeah.
So it's a really good story that I don't think they would have pulled off before. And it's so well done. Photography's great. I highly recommend it. I think people would enjoy it, especially if you like Tom Hardy. But it's not typical Tom Hardy. He plays a very understated, like middle-class Welsh dude with a family. So it's not like typical in your face, I'm Tom Hardy.
Yeah, all the action's over a phone.
Right.
Which is
It's
different.
And it's him being, I mean, honestly, how many men in this world that prioritize their business over their family? And you don't really see it like this every day, but if they do, it's just true, you know. And not even just men, women do it as well. They prioritize, I mean, that's a culture.
Right.
We're told to prioritize our job over our family, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's really good. I love, I don't know, I love it. I'm not saying I love it like I want to watch it 10 times, but
It's an unusual
it's a
road movie,
great
for sure.
road movie, and something that was like different from the rest is probably the other reason why I picked it.
Yeah, I like it that you did, because it's so different than most road trip movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we should just mention, though, that road movies really also lend themselves to comedies. There's a lot of great road comedies. One of my favorites is Plane, Trains, and Automobiles,
Yes.
which
Sure.
I think is
Excellent road trip movie.
that's an excellent use of road travel as exasperating comedy. It just escalates and escalates
meeting people that you wouldn't.
and you're frustrated and you're
normally.
tired and your car's exploding and you're having to hitchhike, and pretty great. And the Blues Brothers is great.
National Lampoon's Vacation.
National Lampoon's Vacation. And Wim Wenders is one of the kings of non-American road movies. Kings of the Road and
Yeah.
Alice in the Cities
Yeah.
and Paris, Texas, which is an American film, but that's one of the great road movies also.
One of the old school road movies is It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Did I miss
Hilarious.
It's a great, I mean, if it's on TV, you should watch it. It's fun. So many celebrities of the 50s and 60s, but
And even younger
excellent.
or even older. I mean, there are silent stars who are in it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody in it is making a cameo.
yeah, it's a great,
Yes. Yeah.
I love that movie.
Epic. It's an epic comedy. You don't see those a lot, but it's epic
Yes.
because it goes all over the country in this road race.
Looking for a W.
It's a
And the
scavenger
next-
hunt
yeah,
movie.
The next time you go on a road trip, think about road trip movies. Could this be a movie?
Could this be a movie? Yes.
You know.
Is it a horror film?
Hopefully
Is it
it's
a
not
comedy?
a bad where someone's murdering people, where
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
people are getting murdered, but you know.
Or where you're murdering people.
Yeah.
Either. I
Right.
don't want that.
Hopefully you'll know if you're on the lam, but maybe not. Maybe someone will have to point it out to you.
You know, that's interesting. Like, I always think of like, you know, I guess if you live in LA, a lot of TV is that people on high speed chases and stuff. That's interesting.
Yes, yes.
Anyways,
It's
that's
part
a
of their
whole
culture.
other part
Yes.
of the genre is as a like a
Yeah.
long chase.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Take a trip with a movie. Why don't you?
Yes.
Here's some suggestions that we just gave you. So that was great. Thank you, Rusty and Heather.
It's a lot of
Thanks,
fun.
Jeff.
I'm ready to get on the road.
For
Me
sure.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
Moving right along.
yeah. Moving right along. Okay. We'll end with a Muppet reference also. Perfect.
Yeah, I like it.
So please remember to check out the Many Rules of Film Club everywhere that you can find podcasts.
You can find our podcast on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, on
The
our
Many
website.
Rules of Film
on our website.
Club.com.
Yeah.
Google. That's the fastest way I tell people.
Just Google it.
Google the many
Yeah.
many rules of filmclub.com.
Yeah. We like comments too. So
Yeah, add
Give
a
'em.
comment. Tell us some ideas you might have or some feedback. We would appreciate that as well.
So great. So this brings me now to rule number 583 of the Many Rules of Film Club, which is if you're looking to move from being a fly girl to a potential Oscar nominee, you had better be Jennifer Lopez, or J-Lo, as her friends call her.
She doesn't like being called that, by the way.
Oh, I better not then. I want to be your friend, Jennifer
Well, yeah.
Lopez.